As an artist, when you go to learn something new tools, new techniques, new mediums, it's easy to crash and burn. Often in the beginning, we get really excited, we see someone else doing it, we go buy a new application, a new brush pack, some new tools, and we give it a go. But naturally, almost, that often doesn't work that well. It can often be an abject failure, it kind of goes pear-shaped, and what we often do in response is kind of retreat. We go looking for new brush packs, new techniques, new paper, new pens, or we just end up watching endless new tutorials. The reality though is that's never going to work because the problem is practice. In fact, what I'd say is you need to practice making the art that you want in the style that you want, using the tools and techniques and processes that you want in order to actually improve. Because here's the real secret. It doesn't really matter how much knowledge you have. You can have decades of experience with anatomy, perspective, rendering, color theory, but if you tackle something new, it's always going to take a lot of time to actually figure out how that new technique works. For instance, I have had 25 years as a professional comic book artist, illustrator, concept artist in a huge number of industries, but I've never really tried inking my own work traditionally, because I'm always a digital artist, or coloring with markers. And that's what we're going to be doing in this video, because what I want to do is share with you some of the techniques that I've developed, some of the frameworks within the Drawing Codex around how to deal with learning new skills. We're going to talk about how you use a simple, reliable process, how you manage scope, how you set the level of challenge correctly so that you can actually take on these challenges and do it in a positive way. Because the reality is the first time you try anything like this, it's just kind of gonna suck. So you need a plan, you need a framework, and you need to be able to step through it and actually make sure that you are having fun. And that's what this video is all about. I literally have almost never done any finished inking traditionally. I've almost never really used markers in any meaningful way. I'm gonna share the process with you, warts and all. And it's gonna kind of suck a little bit for me, but hopefully you will learn a lot of things. As usual for a Drawing Codex video, this is gonna be neither fast-paced nor heavily edited. This is a real-time, fully narrated drawing tutorial. But this is how it's actually done, and I think you're gonna learn a lot if you're interested in actually applying a lot of the different ideas that you see around the place and actually getting better at them. So if you're actually wanting to take on and learn new tools, techniques, could be digital, traditional, whatever, this video is going to walk you through and give you some really solid techniques for how to make that happen. All right, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name is Tim McBurney. I have been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel, we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Okay, in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about a bunch of things. I'm going to do some drawing, going to do some marker drawing, but mostly what I'm going to talk about is a simple, reliable process, how powerful it is, and how you can take on new skills and do so more effectively, I think so, by simplifying your tool set and making sure you manage complexity. So if you're trying to take on or learn a new technique, and this could be digital, could be learning Procreate, could be learning Photoshop, could be learning anything, drawing comics, like whatever it is, the key is often to reduce the complexity of the tools you're using, reduce the complexity of the process you're using, reduce the scope of what you're drawing, and just focus on sort of building a process. But, I often teach people how to do this with Procreate, Photoshop, drawing in a comic book line and color style. But, I know that, so it's one thing for me to say it. What I thought I'd do is try and experiment and show you how I would use a simple, reliable process and a lot of the frameworks I use and talk about through the Drawing Codex to kind of take on some of these new skills. And we're just going to be doing some marker sketching in a sketchbook, and I really have no idea how this should work. This is a fully live demo. This could easily fail, but that's what we're going to do. So I've done some tests before, and let me just walk you through some of the sketchbook, because again, this is sort of what I was doing, and I'll talk to you through some of the processes I was using here and just what I've sort of got planned as an iteration. But this is basically the first kind of real me drawing with markers I've done in decades, right? And again, I'll talk about that as well, because I think My journey with markers, I think, is very indicative of why I talk about a simple, reliable process and why I think it really is the key to you actually unlocking a lot of important skills with your art. So this is a sketchbook I've got. This is kind of one I use for testing. This is actually like, I think one I was kind of using as part of a sketchbook course that I was building. And, you know, a lot of how you re-engage with sketching or you re-engage your drawing habit and learn new skills is often a matter of like managing the challenge. So, you know, I've been drawing elf girls and sketchbooks for decades. I'm pretty comfortable with that. So, you know, it's quite possible for me to play around with that sort of sketchbook and, you know, just sort of do these kind of drawings that are, you know, just me playing around, drawing these kind of little figure, composition, illustration-y sort of things. And yeah, just kind of messing around, having fun, I'm drawing. But the reality is, you know, you have to manage the level of challenge yourself when you're sort of sketching. Think here as well, I was talking about some, you know, drawing out your influence map, is something I think is really important. If you're out there and sort of thinking, hey, I don't know what to do when I come down and sit down in my sketchbook, it's like, think about your like list, think about the things you actually like to do, and then draw some little thumbnails of them, because that'll often get you inspired, right? One of the things I'm sort of going to be drawing here is little dwarves, and that's a major part of, you know, what's on my like list, right? And that's normally what I do. Yeah, again, I use these sketchbooks for all sorts of random things, including just, again, drawing around, noodling. Again, this was probably from last year, right? Again, often I'm trying to, you know, just sitting on the couch, drawing random things. This is kind of what happens in my sketchbook. This was a total failed experiment. I don't know what I was trying to do there. That didn't really work. This didn't really work either. So, you know, like sometimes, and it's funny, like, you know, sometimes even like a more static pose, if you're not really feeling it, you know, that cannot really work that well. Doing some thumbnailing, right? Ideation. Yeah, just kind of playing around. So, you know, this is often what I don't really do sketchbooks at the moment anyway as like an art form. You know, my sketchbooks are really just me messing around with stuff. And yeah, I was just like, well, you could probably do marker on this. It would probably do all right. It's not great marker paper. And again, we'll talk about optimizing and sort of premature optimization of your process, and trying to sort of, you know, find the perfect tools and stuff. But this is kind of what I was dealing with. And again, I'm going to talk a lot about my journey with markers. And as I said, yeah, it's very indicative of kind of how not to succeed when it comes to sort of taking on some skills. But yeah, I haven't really ever done much color traditionally. I grew up with Photoshop early in my life. And I actually bought like a whole bunch of markers, again, that we'll kind of talk about. But really, you know, I kind of fell in love with coloring digitally. It gave me so many more options. It was kind of cheaper. Yeah, and you know, you could sort of redo and stuff. So I kind of grew up like from very young in Photoshop, and that's kind of how I learned to color. So I never really did any drawing or anything where I'd color traditionally. I kind of know how the basics of it work, right? I did a bit of watercolor when I was in high school, but I'm not a professional at this by any means. So it's a good opportunity because, again, I have some skills, I don't have other skills, and you need to figure out a couple of things when you're taking on some of these challenges. So what we're going to be doing here is I've actually got a little sketch that I did, and what I'm going to be doing is sort of taking this and looking at adding some line work to it, and then erasing this, and yeah, then see if we can add some simple color. And I'm basically going to be talking about how we need to reduce scope, reduce complexity, simplify tools, and that's the best way to kind of put one foot in front of the other. So the first thing I'm going to do though with this is understand and notice that, like, look, this is a decent sort of little gestural sketch, right? I can, you know, if we kind of zoom up, look a little bit closer at it, you can kind of see, like, yeah, you know, that's kind of working pretty well. Where this is going to fail though is I need to think about and consider at this stage, where do I want to go, right? Like it's really important when you're starting an illustration to think about what do I actually want to do with this? Like, what is the finish going to be? So if this was going to be a sketch, right, like a legit sketchy sketch, I could just kind of do some really rough lines on top of this, and that would probably be okay. But I think one of the challenges that a lot of people face, and I think what kind of derails a lot of intermediate artists, is not really having a proper understanding of the secondary form and what that means. Because it's one thing for me to do a little bit of sketching here and end up with a bit of a, a bit of a mess. But the reality is, like, if I just go ahead and do this, all these hands are going to look rough, right? Like, these just going to be little squiggle, banana, sausage, spaghetti fingers, right? Like, I'm not going to be able to really do anything fancy with this unless I go in and add what you would call secondary form. And secondary form is what most artists are missing, especially when you're at the intermediate level. This is something where, like, I see this again and again and again and again. You can be pretty good at drawing. And again, this, like, even this hand is not 100% properly placed, but probably, again, it's going to be better than nothing. But yeah, you can be, like, good at drawing. You can kind of have a lot of stuff sorted, but you're never going to get that next level of detail unless you add the secondary form. And this doesn't necessarily mean, like, you need to think in terms of, structural drawing. Like, that's certainly how I do it. That's certainly what I think kind of works. But mostly what I'm talking about when it comes to secondary form is at the drawing phase, actually going in and adding some detail. So if we think about, let me see if I can get a little bit of paper here and we can sort of go through some basics of process here. This is not going to be a fast-paced edited video, as I'm sure you can tell by the time. But yeah, so if we think about a simple process, right? And a simple, reliable one, like super simple. What I'm going to be doing is having a sketch or thumbnail. Now, I've kind of skipped that and just done this as a rough little character design thing, because I've done literally thousands of character designs professionally. I've done thousands of my own character designs. I kind of have a repertoire of character design poses, and I'm not really interested in breaking the mold there. So I just pick a standard character design pose that I've got, and I'm going to place it in the middle of the page. I don't really need much more than this, because my goal here is not to create an illustration. It's just to practice the process of adding marker color to a drawing, right? So we'd kind of have a thumbnail, right? Which is just, do you have a plan? Right? Do I know what I'm doing? Okay, I've got a sketch. If you can't manage to just put a sketch here, do a smaller sketch first. That'll help you. Secondly, right, is I'm going to do a drawing or a construction drawing. Right, construction. And what that's going to do is allow me to, and this works really well, obviously, with comic book styles, because I've got pencil, which is my drawing, and then I'm going to set those lines in stone with my ink, and I sort of can't go back. So you typically, with this, have a really simple way of making sure that, yeah, I'm going to progress, and I need to make sure I draw this properly. Now, what most people do is we just kind of skip this and kind of combine the thumbnail and the plan with sketching, and then we just try and jump forward. But what we need to do in order to improve the drawing here is add, right, primary, secondary, and tertiary forms. It's probably not a great way of spelling or representing those. And then obviously what I'm going to do is lines and then color. And we'll talk about, again, like making that really simple, but that's the basic plan you can kind of run with. Now, what most of the time people fail on is just not doing secondary and not doing tertiary form with their drawing, which is just, we imagine we're going to make that up at the ink phase. So secondary form really is just a matter of doing a second pass and making sure that I actually know what I'm doing. Like, do I actually have the details there? It's good to do some sort of sketchy drawings, but what's really valuable is to go through and make sure, like, oh, okay, like, have I actually kind of figured out where some of these things are going, right? I'm just going to do a second pass. And so you can do this structurally, right? Like, I can think very much about the structure. I can use drawing through. I can use technical drawing. But the bottom line is you often just need to do another few passes more than you imagine in order to actually get the amount of detail that you really want with your art. And this honestly is the number one thing that is holding back most intermediate artists, is we're just not doing those passes. And when you do, often what happens is our lack of knowledge raises its ugly head. So you kind of aren't quite sure what happens at some point. And so, yeah, we just kind of guesstimate and try and rush through. And so you often get little bits and pieces that are, that they're not as refined as they should be. But by just going through and making sure that, okay, before I do inks, I'm going to actually do the drawing. I'm going to construct this out a little bit more. And this is a matter of constantly finding center, right? Constantly trying to find some of those anatomical markers, right? Like I sort of got pectorals, right? But also this, there's often, if you have like bulking bodybuilder sort of vibes, right? Often there's, like these kind of muscles kind of meld into each other. So again, I can draw the structure. Whether or not I actually will render it is another matter. But this gives me the opportunity to go through, add a little bit more detail, right? And I'm going to true up the drawing, right? I'm paying attention to, and I'm giving myself opportunity to draw through, right? So you can see this thing, right, which is kind of like a groin guard / chest guard thing. That's just my sort of fantastical costume thing that I'm sort of making up. Right, here we've got a big sword and sorcery style belt. But yeah, like I'm going to draw this thing through, whatever this is, right? I'm going to be like, does this line up with here? Right, same thing with the belt, right? Now that I've kind of sketched it out and I'm like, yeah, like, look, that seems legit. Let's go through, right? Because again, like no one's going to see these sketch marks. I'm going to be able to delete them, right? Where's the horizon line? Maybe somewhere there, right? We're sort of looking down at this character a little bit, right? I can kind of see the top of their head a bit. Now, there's a lot of technical, there's a wealth of technical skill that you can use in order to do your drawing and figure out how to make it better. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is just another pass. We're just refining it. And I'm availing myself of the benefits of being able to sketch and play around. So you don't necessarily have to draw center lines. You don't necessarily have to do that. That's what I do. That's what I teach. That's what I think will make you better. But fundamentally, what I'm doing here is saying, I can make mistakes. I can draw through, right? Like if I need to draw through and find like where that belt goes so that I can actually draw it properly, I can, right? And I can experiment and play and I can erase and I can have fun. I can try things. And none of the pressure of like me having to make any of these lines final needs to get me down or make my life hard. Right? And that's the fundamental thing you need to pay attention to. And this step is missing for most artists who haven't really developed a solid professional process. And it doesn't matter whether you're digital, traditional, like it's often just this simple step of like, figure out where those details are, where those secondary details are sitting, right? Have another pass. Let's dial this in, right? So I've got center line here. So I'm not doing a full structural drawing demo here, right? Like that's probably for another drawing codex video, but I am talking about the importance of having a simple, reliable process. So if I do want this to, sort of look good, right? Like with some of these tests, I was kind of just rushing through and I'm like, okay, I think the drawing is kind of hurting me here a little bit, right? I was sort of rushing through a little bit, right? You can see I kind of don't properly have that pectoral sorted there. It's not really working. This one is kind of okay, but still pretty rough. Yeah, but instead of worrying about, again, buying 1,000 markers, like what brush do you use, like all that kind of stuff that is important. If you're not actually practiced at doing these more detailed drawing passes, it's going to be very hard to actually construct something, right? And do some sort of drawing that's going to allow you to actually test out the rest of that stuff. So also keep in mind, I don't do inking traditionally ever. Like on a professional level, I've never inked a professional drawing ever in my life. Yeah, this would probably be one of the first drawings I'm ever doing in my entire life where I'm actually doing a bit more structure and I'm actually going to sort of ink it with this thing. So yeah, there's a lot of skills here where, I just normally don't do that because I've got, like, why I would just use Photoshop. Like, I know how to do that. And the reality is, like, yeah, you never really need to, like, once you have something that works, that's all you need. Like, I don't need to learn how to do markers. I kind of want to, and, I'm doing it sort of as a demo because I think that's like a fun thing to do. But, if on a professional level or, whatever it may be, there's no real benefit to doing that. Yeah, it's just for fun. But I know that if I have a simple, reliable process and I want to actually get that next level of detail, I need to at least put the secondary form in. Now, you don't always need to, with your drawing, put in the tertiary form, but if I wanted this to be a cover, like if I really was trying to draw something fancy, I'd make sure I'm drawing the fingernails, right? I'm getting the exact shape of the fingernails. I'd want to draw in the knuckles. I'd make sure I drew in and refined a lot of the textural details. I need to get everything right. But in most cases, the things that we need is just another pass. You just need to get the structural side of it happening, right? And again, this doesn't have to be that, I'm making it a finished illustration. This is still rough, right? This is still a rough idea for a drawing. It's still a sketch. It's still me playing around. But even with that, I know that if I want this to be decent, I need to add that kind of secondary form. All right, so the goal is, like, here's these kind of hair. He's got his kind of hair coming along here. All right, this is kind of the beard. Boom. Right, an ear here. Just going to check this and check the perspective here is actually right. Because again, one of the most frustrating things about doing demos where you're recording the process is I'm always looking at it from a weird angle. Whereas when I'm drawing, I often have it up on an angle like this. Yeah, I mean, I feel this, right? That mustache could be a little bit higher. Right, face is like a little bit crooked. Right. And this is the stuff you get the chance to refine when you're doing a construction drawing or a second pass, right? Like, I get the chance to zoom out and be like, okay, is that right? Now, the problem that, a lot of people fall into is that, like, we are doing multiple passes, but we're often not thinking structurally enough, right? So, often what happens is, you kind of start drawing and you draw the face and then some of it doesn't look right. And so you redraw the face and then you redraw the face again, you redraw the face again. And, we just kind of work around and kind of keep fussing. the way that we can add more structure to our secondary forms and all of that stuff is to just make sure you sort of do it in passes, and that we don't let it go until we've kind of done what is required at that particular stage. So often what happens is, if you are sort of doing those extra passes, it's off, and maybe it's sort of not working right, which again is still the case, because this is a skill. It's not just a matter of doing it. It's a skill we need to build. Often, yeah, if you're doing those extra passes, but you're just kind of chasing detail around, modifying things, that's where it's like, we need to draw through. We need to be a little bit more structural, right? Like that's where that will help you. So if you're just kind of redrawing a million things and continually just abusing the surface of the drawing, and it's still not working, like after drawing this 100 times, 200 times, it's still not working, it's probably a sign that you need to go back and get more structure here, right? So I did have, I wanted to kind of have maybe a strap or something going over here, which you can kind of see, right? So he has, this thing is meant to be like a medallion, and I'll come back to it again. I just got distracted talking about something else. Now I'm going to go back to it. Yeah, this thing here is like a pack that he's got. Again, this is just, I'm not breaking the mold. I'm doing standard Tim McBurney fantasy design tropes. Yeah, so if you're sort of wondering like, hey, like the drawing's not working for me, I'm not getting the amount of detail I want, that's where, like, look, adding that structure will help, right? Like adding that extra structure will help, and drawing through will help. Like if your drawing is not solid and you're really wanting it to be more solid or more dimensional or sort of more realistic, that's where adding more structure will actually help. And that just means, yeah, like drawing through, thinking about like where's my center line for this ellipse, right? If I wanted to draw more ellipses there, right? I could draw through, make sure like this kind of bit on here is sort of represented there, right? Again, I can line up this stuff, right? Get a bit more sort of perspective going. So again, like if you're sort of lacking some of that structure, or you don't really know where your center line is, that's where add more structure, right? Like draw through more. That's what will fix that. If you're just like, no, I'm happy with my drawing being like a bit wobbly, or like I just don't really care about that, I just want to add more detail, then it's a matter of just do more passes, just refine it, get it to the point where you're happy with it. Don't necessarily take a huge leap when it comes to doing the inking. Yeah, and this was the step that I was missing, right? So probably if I think about building a simple, reliable process, and what was sort of going wrong for me, again, to go back to what I was sort of saying, I probably don't need to put in this, right? I probably don't. I mean, I can kind of indicate where that would go, but I could probably do that in the inking phase. Yeah, so if I sort of look at what I was lacking early on when I had no idea how to draw and I bought a million markers, like what was going wrong there? Because I was like, I need the tools, I need to know how to sort of draw. I was looking at tutorials, I was doing a lot of stuff. And yeah, I bought probably $500 worth of markers from the art supply store in Adelaide, Australia. And I was really like dedicated to learning to use them. I saw so many cool artists using markers. And like, I also wanted to do, digital stuff. But part of me was, still wanting to engage in that traditional style of drawing, with markers and bits and pieces. And yeah, I bought $500 worth of markers. I think I still have them somewhere. I think they're all dried up. But that's what happened, is like I basically never used any of them. They all dried up and I wasted $500. And that was $500 in old money. That was like a lot of money. I was a student. But I spent the money, I bought the tools, but I just didn't know how to use them. I had no framework. And, I would try and do, stuff that sort of looked a bit more finished, and it would just always be a mess, right? And the reality was, it wasn't the tools, it wasn't even that I didn't know how to use markers, it was that I wasn't doing enough of this drawing strategy, right? Like I wasn't actually progressing through the drawing properly. I didn't really have a good plan for how it was going to work. And as a result, it really doesn't matter what tools I have, or, even like it's even hard for me to learn how to use them, right? I basically, with those markers, I had them all and I tried, and my stuff just looked totally garbage. Like it just didn't look like anything. I'd do a marker drawing and it just, like, nothing happened, right? Like I put the marker down, it just looked like a mess. I tried to blend colors, it looked like a mess. I was like, maybe I need different paper, maybe I need this. What I needed at the time was a simple, reliable process for me to manage the scope of how to actually build those skills. So what happened as a result of all of that was that, I spent a huge amount of money buying paper, markers, pencils, ink, like all this kind of stuff, trying to figure it out, watching tutorials. But I didn't really have just a simple way of making art, and I just didn't know where to start. And that's really the difference that changed for me, is that once I kind of started working digitally and actually had to sort of go through this, that sort of worked a lot better. But the thing that actually changed was like, I just sort of developed really simple ways for actually making art. Anyway, I think this is done. And again, we'll sort of look at exactly, how that kind of functions when we do the inking in a minute. But first step, if you're sort of thinking about, okay, I want to sort of test some of these skills, this is extremely risky because, you can do all this sort of rendering, and maybe if you haven't spent 20 years drawing, this will be a lot more challenging. That's where, again, probably reduce the scope, experiment with just faces or something like that. So that's really the first step, and that's the first thing that I was missing, was that I would just try and draw a whole scene, or I try and draw like a whole character, or I try and draw a pose that I couldn't draw, and I was really excited about it, but none of it would work. And I think what I needed to do was like way reduce the complexity of what I was trying, like do something where I know I can do the drawing, I know I can do the ink, practice the drawing, practice those elements of the process, which is like have a plan, like can I place the character on the page, can I create a nice little plan for an image that I think might kind of work, and okay, then am I actually practicing this? So it's like, we often think about like what I want is like colors, what I want is like this kind of cool technique, but you only get there through a process. And I every time I just jumped ahead and I was like, okay, now I can use the markers that I just spent $700. I think it was probably more than $500 I actually spent on this overall. If you count up all the nonsense that I bought, it was a huge amount of stuff. I spent all that money. I was like keen to try, but again, I didn't have the restraint to understand that I needed to kind of go through all these different steps. And so it just never really worked for me. And what I know now is like, no matter what complexity I take on, if I don't actually get a decent drawing, I can't practice the markers, and I can't create nice finished lines in order for me to do that. So that's kind of what I realized is like, probably I need to create finished lines first. I'm going to erase the pencils, then I'm going to have another go at the markers, and I can easily futz this up. I probably will futz it up to a certain degree. But I can't really get there unless I practice these things along the way. And that's such an important thing to understand, is like art is created through process, and you can't practice the color until you kind of at least understand how to sort of step through those things in the beginning. But it is really important to practice the color, because as you can see, what I've learned through doing these is like a massive amount. So these are what I would consider to be sort of failures. This one just looks a bit awkward to me based on my normal capabilities. I don't think that process works for me. It doesn't feel right. Again, I might come back to it. I think this works where I forgot to erase the pencils. I'm like, no, that looks dirty. Can't do that. And, yeah, I need to think a little bit more about how I sort of manage the color schemes and sort of, yeah, practice actually using the markers. But yeah, I'm not actually going to be able to do that unless I step through the process and start building it up as a sequence. So anyway, hopefully that helps you think through the first stages of this. But yeah, that's the finish of the drawing. What we'll do next in a second is, use this kind of, this is really cool. This, let's see, yeah, because we kind of got it here. You can sort of see how it works, right? A lot of people use these. You may have sort of seen this, right? But yeah, it's kind of like a felt tip, but it has a bit of a brush-iness to it. So it's kind of technically a brush pen, but yeah, you can get like quite nice thin lines. But yeah, you can also get sort of thick ones. It's quite cool. It's like a really, it's kind of brush pen light, right? For people like me who don't do a lot of traditional inking, this is kind of like a pen. Yeah, Tombow sort of brush pen. Again, I'll leave a link to exactly which one this is in the description below, because there's a couple of different hardnesses you can get of this. But yeah, in order to sort of experiment and play around with this, I'm not going to be able to get anywhere until I actually do this construction phase. So yeah, we'll take a quick break, and then when we come back, that's what we'll be doing. All right. So this is probably, again, the sort of thing where, like, the biggest challenge I find when it comes to inking traditionally is that, yeah, you can kind of mess it up, and that's kind of terrifying. So I think you often have to iterate a lot, experiment a lot, and if you're sort of learning, yeah, just be prepared for that, and, just understand that's fine. It's going to be a learning process. We'll see. As I said, I don't do much actual kind of inking when it comes to these things. Let's see whether I can zoom up a little bit. Yeah. Can we see that? Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, so normally when I'm doing this, it's got a bit of, this is all the stuff you have to deal with, all the, like, the physicality when we're doing traditional inking. I've got to deal with, like, hair on the brush, all this kind of nonsense. Right? And there's so many different ways to succeed when it comes to, inking, so many different sort of processes. I'm just kind of going for it. But yeah, very easy for me to completely mess this up. But I'm just gonna go through, see if I can use the same kind of processes I would use when it comes to doing my comic book work and professional work traditionally. Boom. And even though it's probably, like, not the smartest thing to kind of start with the face, yeah, I do feel like that is going to give me the confidence to kind of move through the rest, right? And often I do feel as if, starting with the face, starting up there is like a good way to break the ice. So yeah, I'm going to try make this hair feel, again, it feels a bit like fur, which is kind of probably the wrong vibe. But yeah, just a little bit of texture there. So yeah, this is still what I would sort of call like a sketch in terms of, the level of sort of polish I'm going with, right? The size that I'm kind of drawing. So yeah, I'm not trying to create the best, most polished line work here. I'm trying to learn how to create marker illustrations a bit better. And I think that's why, yeah, it's always really important to understand, like, what is what is the goal you have when you're doing this, right? Like what are we actually trying to achieve? Because the reality is, yeah, like if I was trying to create a finished illustration, like learning how to do markers at the same time is not a good plan. It's good to separate the sort of learning you do from, hey, I'm actually going to create something that is finished and polished. Because often we'll sort of make different decisions when we're kind of doing that. And the other thing is the process that you use is going to be slightly different, and the emphasis you put on different phases within that process is going to be different depending on what your goal is. And all that means is that I would probably spend another half an hour refining this construction drawing, refining this drawing, if I knew that, this had to be a highly polished illustration. So I'd probably also try and do it on a, slightly bigger bit of paper, or maybe I'd use a slightly more precise inking tool, right? I'm actually finding this is like pretty big, right? It's like, yeah. Yeah, it's a bit of sort of wobble, right? Not as clean as I would normally get. But we'll see. Yeah, the other key when you're sort of learning new techniques and things is, just to be pretty flexible. Nothing's ever gonna turn out perfectly the first few times you try it. Oh, sorry, I'm going into inking zone. Something that I really recommend when you're doing this digitally, which is quite challenging when you're working traditionally. Let's go above. All right, that might be a little bit of a easier view for some of it. Yeah, something that I always recommend is to actually make sure you reduce the opacity of your sketch. So when I'm working in Procreate or Photoshop and I do the sort of finish lines or ink lines, I like to call them finish lines because, quite frankly, when you're working digitally, you can create finish lines with more of a pencil look. Right? You can win so many different ways, but obviously this is actual kind of inking because once I'm done, this is done. I can't fix it if I sort of mess it up. Yeah, but I often recommend setting the opacity to this way down so that when I'm doing the finished ink lines, I can really see all the lines that I'm sort of making here. But yeah, when you're working over sort of slightly darker pencils, that's actually quite challenging to do because the pencil's there and I kind of can't see the lines in the same way that I sort of used to, or that I am used to. So I'm going to try and go with the process of like getting the major lines down first, and then I'll erase, and then I'll see what I got at the end of this, right? Got shadow there. Let's see whether I can add this. Yeah, getting kind of wavy lines. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below whether any of this kind of resonates with you. If you do want to learn sort of some of the stuff that I'm doing on a theoretical level, or you want to sort of see a demo where I'm doing this digitally in Procreate and Photoshop, yeah, definitely check out the new quick start guide I've got. Because yeah, hopefully that will be updated. I'm already updating the way that, like, the place it's actually housed. So it's now on the new Drawing Codex platform that allows, like, much easier to download the PSDs and the workbooks. The Quick Start Guide is broken up into multiple new sort of videos. So it's a much better sort of learning environment. So again, if you downloaded the old Quick Start Guide, yeah, I'll probably send an email out saying like, hey, here's the update, or just sort of sign up for it again, either way. And yeah, that gives a bit more context into the concept of a simple, reliable process, like exactly what I'm sort of talking about there. Kind of blocking everything so you can't really see it. And yeah, I obviously go through the process of doing this like in a much more tutorial way, right? Like everything I do on YouTube is less structured than when, you know, I can set it out in multiple videos. You know, we got sort of descriptions underneath everything. You can download the PSD, you know, you can download and see the steps because, you know, we're not sort of on YouTube. So yeah, if you're thinking about like, what's the difference between the kind of quick start guide or any of the workshops that I sort of do that are free, you can just sort of download for free. Again, you just got to give the email address so I can actually sort of send it to you. But yeah, the difference is, you know, YouTube kind of forces me to package it differently, whereas this just makes it more like an actual kind of course, right? Or guide. So yeah, check that out if you want a bit more information about how I kind of think about the simple, reliable process, and again, step by step of how I would do it in digital. But here, I'm doing the same stuff, right? Yeah, all right. I feel like I'm not quite getting, and this could just be trying to get the right camera angle, keep my hand out of the way. But yeah, I think one of the things is that, yeah, I'm sort of like sometimes when I'm inking around, right? Again, let's see if we can wobble this line. This is what traditional is like way better at, is like these little, right, sort of wobbles and things. It's like so much easier to get, right? Like a bit of texture there. But yeah, I might just not be sequencing the strokes properly. So I'm trying to use this because it is a bit like a felt tip, but maybe this is something where I need to structure my strokes a lot better and treat it much more like a pen where, right, each stroke is kind of considered more. All right, so if I go down here, instead of just kind of following it up, maybe I should start down here. Try not do it all in one stroke. Because one of the things you really sort of learn about, like when I watch a lot of like manga artists doing their sort of work, when you're working with a G pen, like you've really got to kind of sequence your shots. Sorry, your lines, right? You're like, I can, you know, we kind of know how to get to that line, but in order to get to it, you know, I've got to come at it from a particular angle. And that's stuff that like you never have to do when you're working digital. But yeah, I'm kind of just used to being able to draw the lines from any starting point. All right, so let's see again if this goes here. Again, I want to just kind of do it in one fell swoop. But I think what I'm finding is that's requiring me to put a little bit more pressure than I'm sort of comfortable with. Yeah, so it could be that really this inking implement requires a larger drawing for me. Like it's not really letting me get, when I press hard enough to control the distribution of ink and get the pressure that I want so that I can kind of control, then yeah, it seems to be sort of not quite giving me the line that I want. And this is where, like, yeah, so much of drawing is about pressure control, pressure sensitivity, and the tactile feedback you get. And what that means is it's actually really simple. Is that like say I want to make this stroke here, right? Again, I want to make it in a controlled manner, right? And same as this one, I want to make it in a controlled manner. But in order to sort of control the pressure, probably I'm going to have to press down on it to a certain degree, right? And especially if I want to sort of do it in one mark like that. But as I do that, I'm having to, depending on how the brush works, whether it's sort of a G pen or something like this, as I press harder, it creates a bigger mark. So it's like I don't quite have the control that I need to create the fainter, smaller lines while applying the pressure that I need. Right? And again, these are just funny feet. These are not real feet. It's just little ovals. So again, being pretty rough with it. All right, yeah. Let's draw this hand. So again, part of me just wants to like draw it, right? I'm like, let's just draw the outline. Let's sort of get rid of it. Right. Let's fill that up. Draw this line. This line. Again, just kind of fill that up. Same thing here. So yeah, this is really interesting. Again, I feel like I'm learning a bit about how to control the brush. I'd probably do the face differently now that I've had this sort of experience. Boom. Yeah, put a few little textural kind of marks here. This is also in a sketchbook, so it's kind of like compressing, right? We don't quite have the control that we would have if this was a proper board. All right, so this is where I'm like, all right, I mostly got everything, I think. But not quite sure. Again, how should I? Right, should we put some extra texture here? This is where normally you kind of really mess things up if you're just trying stuff for the first time. Is you're like, oh, I kind of got most of it there. Now let me F around and find out. Right, I had some of these marks here. Again, not sure whether these are going to properly work. Again, just sketch. I have to keep reminding myself. All right. Yeah, let's see if we can put in some of this ground plane. Again, super rough. Don't. I feel like, yeah, if I was to do this professionally, I think I would want, based on the way that I kind of draw, I feel like I would want a much larger canvas. Maybe like the like very large bits of paper. That's how I think I would maybe sort of solve the detail level. Be doing it, if I was doing a comic or something, it'd be sort of 2-up, which is sort of how, the classic sort of comic book artists would work. And that's another part of the process, right, that I just had no idea at in the beginning. You know, when I was starting out and trying to think about, yeah, like how do I learn markers and stuff? You know, I think I was just either drawing too small or too big, right? Not really getting it to be the right kind of size. But yeah, if you think about, you know, the classic sort of comic book artists back in the day, you know, sort of golden age and silver age era, people would draw two up. You know, it's you're basically drawing like twice as large, you know, in vertical and horizontal dimension as you are going to print, which meant, you know, for a lot of newspaper articles and things, like newspaper comics, news strips, these were huge, you know, because like a broadsheet newspaper was huge, and it often meant that actually the the sort of size of paper you would use would be, I'll see if I can do the rough translation into inches, but in centimeters, you know, you're looking at like 70 centimeters high for a page, 50 centimeters wide. A lot of European comics are kind of done with that sort of vibe as well, or even bigger, right? This is for comics that were done, again, you know, in the golden age. So those are huge, huge pages, right? Like this would be one little panel. All right. So I'm just going to pause it for 5 seconds and make sure that I do not smudge this. Because again, this is another one of these things where like, I just don't have the experience. And I remember doing this so many times where, yeah, I would be like, yeah, cool. I'm going to do the markers, or I'm going to erase it. And then you'd erase it, and it would all disappear. And you can see that's kind of coming apart. So let's pause for a minute. We'll let it dry, and then when we come back, we will erase this and do a final pass on the inking, which I think is actually a really important, critical thing to do, whether you're working digital or traditional. Now, if you'd like to learn more about line and color illustration, the same style I create all my comics and illustrations in, you can check out the new version of my free Quick Start Guide. It now covers Photoshop and Procreate and walks you through developing a simple, reliable line and color process. It's free. The link will be in the description. Go check it out. I think we're good to go. And I'm using a kneadable eraser, so I'm going to try lifting it off, and hopefully I'll see whether it's going to sort of smudge. But yeah, let me know in the comments down below whether you kind of have had that experience where, yeah, you go to sort of learn something, and you can spend like an hour doing this, and you're like, oh yeah, cool, I'm learning stuff. And then you go to like, yeah, erase your pencils, and yeah, it all just kind of smudges and disappears into nothing, and you just destroy all your work. Again, this is information we're learning, but that is also super, super frustrating, and important not to kind of lose heart. But that's definitely what I did most times. Most times I'd just be like, maybe this isn't for me. I sort of give up. Let's bail. So this is something where, yeah, like, you know, depending on how you're kind of working and what you want to do, you can kind of handle this stage in different sort of ways. I don't have a really super solid style that I'm kind of looking for with this, but that's just something that would develop over time, right? So style is a function of function. And what that means is that, you know, as I learn more of what works with these tools and I practice more and more with them, yeah, I'm going to get better and better at kind of understanding how to use them. But here I'm just going to erase a little bit, right? So what I've done is kind of erase a little bit. And now I can kind of see fainter versions of those lines. And I'm going to have another go at kind of going in there, just adding a bit more structure. Like this is where, again, you could totally blow this. But yeah, just trying to experiment a little bit. But yeah, this is really important to do when you're doing this traditionally, because often when we are working traditionally, this kind of just disappears, right? So, all this kind of sketch work that you do, you turn off the layer, it all kind of disappears, and people are often like, oh, what's happening? So it's good to get your inking to a certain point. Oh yeah, like this, these lines are not good, right? That is kind of not working well. I need to work on that. But yeah, you sort of get your lines to a certain point, and then you kind of need to understand that like that drawing I did is only going to get me so far, right? Like now I need to go to the next. I need to go to the next phase, right? I need to figure out how to make this ink drawing better. So yeah, this is where, like Here Be Dragons, it's very easy to kind of mess this one up. Yeah, I'm not going to try too much to, do anything sort of too fancy here. But yeah, let's think about some sort of shadows under there. Right, I could try adding some stuff there. Right, like just a little bit more. Yeah, once you can kind of see like, oh, okay, this is sort of what I got, then it's a little bit easier from that point on to, go through and try and, I feel like that was maybe a bit of a mistake. Yeah, go through and see if we can refine things a little bit. Right, obviously I missed this. Right. Yeah, you can kind of see more clearly where those little sketch lines that we did were actually holding the weight. And there's probably, there's a couple of things here that I'd probably do differently if I was to have another go at it. Yeah, if in doubt, black it out, right? I can always black it out a little bit if I sort of get stuck. But yeah, I'm going for a bit of a, sort of drawn inking look. Yeah, so kind of cleaned that up. Yeah, probably just going to mess up most of this other stuff if I start playing around with it. But I could try and make some of these areas a bit darker. Yeah, hard to say. Yeah, I'm probably just going to leave it sort of chicken out a bit. Cool, but I mean, I feel like that helped me a little bit with it. I feel like I'm still not, like this face thing is still not 100%. Bit more of a shadow. But yeah, could easily push that too far and kind of ruin it. So yeah, I'm probably going to leave it, because you know what? The whole point of this is markers, and that's probably what we need to remember. Okay, just pause for a second to let it dry. Let's erase this. So it's very likely that, there's many of you out there who have way more of an understanding of how this works than me. in terms of the process, like what works, what doesn't. What we're after, and I think what's really important, is to understand that what you want is confidence. So because I have an understanding of a simple, reliable process that I want to use, but because I kind of have an understanding of how I can, simplify the use of colors, it allows me to, mess around with this stuff and do it on a, on a video where I could easily fail. Is that, I have a solid understanding of like the process that I would take to get from A to B. And that's often what you want. And if you do simplify your tools, simplify your processes, like really sort of clearly understand what you want, then it becomes a lot easier. Now again, there's probably a million ways that we could do this next step, which is the color. But what I'm going to do, and we'll talk briefly about the sort of strategy, is just try and keep it really simple, and I'm going to keep the value ranges very sort of bright. And I think this will be part of like a simple, reliable way of kind of using some of these markers. And we got to remember the goal here is just to practice implementing these things, see what works. And if you're trying this on your own, you kind of want to just go through the process, go through the steps, right? Go from A to B, figure out what works, experiment, and just get mileage in, right? Going through the process, working out which markers to use, which colors to use, how to combine them, all this kind of stuff that's really obvious if you sort of tried it a little bit before. But if you're doing this digitally or traditionally, again, it doesn't matter. It's the same process that we're going to go through, which is getting confident, just going through the steps, right? Like adding one thing after another and just getting confidence to know, oh, okay, this is where I'm starting, right? This is where I'm going, right? This is what's next. This is what I need to do. Yeah, and once you get a feel for that, a lot of this other stuff becomes much, much simpler. So anyway, let's look next at how we use these colors and what my plan is, given that, apart from these two things, I really have no idea what I'm doing. Let's quickly, though, have a look at this closer up so you can see some of the wobbly lines I've got, some of the awkwardness. And it's interesting because, even though I did a lot of that drawing, you can see probably like to me that the drawing was more successful than the ink work. This is still something I'd need to kind of work on. It doesn't really matter how much experience you have or how much, I've literally been drawing and doing comics and doing finished line work for decades. It doesn't matter, because if you haven't tried something before, it's going to take a long time to build those skills and to integrate them and to actually make sure you kind of understand how they work with your style. So this is often where I think there's this kind of misunderstanding that, like, if you're like good at one thing, you're sort of good at everything. It's just not the case. You always need to integrate, you always need to understand how that process actually functions in order to actually get some sort of benefit from it, right? So there's, as part of this drawing, there's thousands and thousands of little decisions that I'm making in terms of, do I feather this line? Do I draw this line thick? Do I draw this line thin? And even though I can say in my mind, well, I know it should be thin, I know it should be feathered, I'm just not able to actually do that with the tool because I haven't done it 1,000 times yet. And when I sort of go to do it, I realize I'm already making that line and I'm having to press harder than I want. So it's, even though I know like the mistakes that I'm making, I don't really understand how to fix them yet. So that's just a matter of repeating the process, right? Like going through the steps. So how do we simplify this? Well, you can certainly, and I think you should, let's see if I can get some little test cards I can use for some of this to just kind of play around with some of these to kind of prove my point. So yeah, if you are using a sketchbook like this, it's really useful to have, which again, I'm going to put that there now. Big sort of chunk. I just ripped a couple of pages out of the sketchbook and I'm going to put that behind, because this is obviously not marker paper. it's decent sort of drawing paper in a Moleskine art book, but it's not marker paper, so it's just going to bleed through, right? As you can see here, right? Bleeding all the way through. Yeah, so I mean, obviously, if you're using this, it's good to understand like how actually dark are these things, because even the ones that seem very light are actually very dark, right? When I sort of first was playing around with this, yeah, I tried a couple of these and they're just way darker than I would imagine. So, you know, even this, right? If we kind of look at what these kind of markers are and what these pencils are, let me make sure I do not. Let's not ruin it. That would be embarrassing, right? So we can kind of see here, right? Like this is it's like green, gray, 1. And it's still quite dark. So that's like the lightest you could go. Now, in terms of illustration theory, what we need to understand is that, yeah, with a line and color style, typically the line work is going to carry a lot of the darkness and the tonality. And that means I actually want these to be quite light, right? So even this, which is, right, kind of a salmon pinky color, which is probably what I'll use, because again, I'm just trying to keep things really simple in the beginning, right? Like even this is quite dark. So if you're using this technique that I'm using, which is where I want the lines to show through, I'm not going to add a lot of tonality to that. Yeah, you know, I'm going to want to keep things very sort of basic. And there's a number of different, you know, techniques I can kind of use in order to sort of experiment and play around. You know, what I've sort of done here is you know, use these kind of much warmer, redder colors as a shadow, and they will, as a general rule, go over this pretty well, right? But yeah, I think actually maybe I was using this one, green gray 3. As sort of a darker one. So yeah, I'm going to be using green gray 1, green gray 3 as sort of just general tonal things. And maybe I will think about, yeah, that looks more like it. So yeah, I'll be using very light colors as a way to basically add color to a drawing that has a line base. So you don't always want to create a huge amount of darkness or rendering unless that's your intent. I've got a very thick line style here, so I don't need to do that. And that's the theory that I'm going to use in order to just play around and sort of see what happens. Now, in terms of a color plan, excuse me, what we really need to do here is, yeah, think about this. So I'm kind of going to hit everything that is kind of this sort of gray register with green gray 1, and I'm going to separate that from the sort of fleshy color, which is kind of just pink, salmon pink. And then maybe I'll think about the cape being a different color. Maybe like a blue or something like that. So the idea there is that in most cases, what's really happening is I'm just kind of putting in 2 colors. I've just got a skin tone, and then I'm going to deal with grays, warm grays, cool grays, or as we'll kind of see, I can use these much more red colors to add a kind of shading pass, essentially a warm pass. But where I kind of start is just pretty simple, right? I'm going to put in and color in all of the skin with this kind of really basic color, and all I need to do is make sure I don't accidentally get the, and again, I don't know how much this is. I think these are meant to be sort of watercolor or sort of alcohol proof, but yeah, they might be sort of picking up a bit of the kind of line work here. So you can see I've already, because this bleeds a bit, it's not marker paper, we've already kind of lost the eyes being white. That would be something I'd sort of need to put in. Let's see if I can keep the teeth here being white. So yeah, that's basically the plan. is just go through very roughly. Again, this is going to bleed, but here's another thing, and this is what we're going to talk about in terms of, keeping it simple, right? And oh yeah, you can see that's really picking up the ink there. So that either means like, it's not properly dry yet. Oh yeah, I'm not properly understanding something about the technique. But this to me is like a really important part of this process, which is like, what you need to do in order to learn art is put pencil to paper, is put marker to paper. So you need to experience and understand like what it's like, is this like, how does this stuff kind of work? And it's very easy to sort of get overwhelmed, or as I did in the beginning, right, with my marker stuff, just like not start. So I would try a couple of times. I tried a couple of things, right? It didn't work how I wanted. I got scared. And then basically I just kind of give up. I'm just like, oh, that's too hard. It's not for me. Not really working. So what I'd say is, yeah, just sort of jump in and experiment and play around, but put in the time and effort. Like actually, as I keep saying, like think about the process that you want to use. Think about the technique you want to use and do the best you can, but don't worry about optimizing. Like I don't need the marker paper, or at least I don't think I do at this stage. You don't need the most fancy program to, do digital art. You just kind of need to get the basics right. And then you can kind of work on the rest. And I think that's such an important thing to understand, is you can actually learn most of the important parts of the process before you get fancy tools. Like you can learn most of what you need to about drawing just from messing around with pencil, right? You don't really need any of this stuff really even, because most of the problems here are going to be at the drawing phase. Insofar as this succeeds, is not going to be because the marker is well done, right? We already know that's going to be amateurish. But there's a lot of things you can do in order to reduce the scope and make sure that we put our best foot forward. And a lot of that is figuring out exactly how much to kind of obsess over stuff. Like exactly how much do I care about the details? And so even though this paper isn't great, right, for doing this, it's not bad. And it's going to bleed a little bit, but that's fine, because again, we're just sort of playing around. And I think just having that disregard for getting all the details right, but a high regard for getting the process right and stepping through is, I think, the winning combo. So this is green gray 1. And basically what I'm going to do, and this is like a really simple image plan, right? Like this is not complicated. And I think this is also something that's really good to get your head around. Right, is like, I do not need to have like a super sophisticated color scheme in order to get started with markers. I would say in most cases, just experiment with black and white, right? That'll give you pretty much everything you really need without all of the headache. And then just try and add one color at a time. Same thing for digital, right? Like in many cases, what people are doing is trying to optimize and be like, how do I get the professional technique? How do I do this? And the reason no one starts, and the reason no one makes art, and the reason no one really kind of figures out what they want to do and finds their style is because you just aren't actually making and finishing art. And that's often because we don't have a simple way of doing it, right? And that means simpler color scheme, simpler way of working through things, etc., etc. So here again, I'm like, oh, maybe there's like an even, maybe I'll use a warm gray on the hair. Yeah, and probably what I do is, with this, I would just have an expectation that, yeah, this is going to take me a couple of 100 hours to have some level of success with, right? If I really sort of wanted to get good at, working with marker, it's probably going to take me a couple of 100 hours to to get anywhere with it. And the main trick that I often talk about, the entire thesis of the Line and Color Academy, is what we want to do though is make sure that like that's fun, that we do that in a way where we're actually having fun with that process. So yeah, let me see whether I have some other colors here. Okay, I've got a couple more colors. Yeah, so we've got a warm gray here, which again, we could probably use as a way of, see whether we can kind of just test this out. Right, maybe this could be a better thing to use here for the hair, right? Or even try and do it as a like, maybe it's a bit, right? Maybe it's a bit gray. So trying to make big sort of shapes. One of the good things about this, right, that again we might not consider to be good in the beginning, is that, yeah, because this bleeds, it kind of softens every shape I make, right? So, you know, I don't get to look at or mess around with a million ugly brush strokes because they all kind of blend into each other nicely. It's one of the great things about, right, about traditional art. Everything just kind of is nice and soft. Everything like blends together, especially, and again, like the worse the paper is, the more that is the case. Yeah. So yeah, what I tend to find with this is, you know, these things stay pretty warm, pretty wet for a while. So, you know, it's pretty easy for me to go in and keep tweaking and keep adding tonality to it, right? I'm not getting that kind of overlappy sort of look that often is, you know, a big problem, right? And again, I feel like I could we combine the warm and green gray so that it creates a slightly different color. So again, this is what I'm dealing with, and what I'm sort of talking about is like, I'm just gonna play with grays, and I'm gonna try and not make things too fancy. Again, I could try and leave some of these things light, but I'm not going to. I'm very much going for like a flat sort of look, right? I'm not trying to create shines or anything of that nature. I'm trying to create stuff that, yeah, has a particular level of flatness to it. Okay, so I have this yellow here that I feel like is probably the wrong sort of yellow, and we can kind of test it out, but maybe not. Maybe that's not going to be as bright as I imagine. Right, got some sort of gold. Yeah. Again, is it going to go over these? It is not. But also what I think is a really good idea and something that's sort of worth focusing on is, here I've got warm gray 3. I'm not sure whether this is going to be too much, but yeah, like get everything sorted first. Like get everything down, get all of the base colors there, and then think about shadows, think about refining it. Because one of the good things about markers is, yeah, you can sort of build up, right? Like markers is a build-up medium. It's essentially, based on my understanding at least, you know, a light to dark medium. Again, kind of use, so I'm using the brush tip here on these Ohuhu markers to kind of get the edge, and then I'm sort of going in there And yeah, I find I kind of need to saturate the page to kind of get the, the sort of level of flatness that I want. Again, that's like warm. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. We'll see. But yeah, this is coloring book style stuff. But as I touched on, the key here that I'm going for is keep it really simple. We've just got grays and I've got a skin tone. Maybe I'll pick like a blue for the cape or something. And it's just this, like being able to keep it super basic, that's going to allow me to create something where like I'm not going to, like the mistakes that I made early on when I was doing this, as I keep saying, like when I bought my $500 worth of markers, is that, I was just trying too much. I'd try to have too many weird colors. I'd try and build it up way too much. And that means that, yeah, you never get the feeling for like, okay, what's it like to do this, How long does it take? Is it worth it? All those little kind of bits and pieces. So I feel like here I've got warm gray. That's what I want. And I'm just going to hit this with the big one because I don't think this needs to be that precise. Oh, I'm sort of bleeding them into each other. It's just amateur night. Right, again, got to sort of saturate it a bit, sort of get all of that happening. And here, because I've already got some of this stuff over here, that might be bleeding in. Okay, and where are they sitting? Maybe again, sort of a deserty environment. I'm not sure. And again, like this might not be the style you want to use, markers in, right? This is a very particular kind of style, right? And it's a bit more sort of concept-y. At the moment, it's not looking good. I'm just like, you know what? I'm not into this. Don't consider that to be kind of working. Yeah, but let's see what we can do. All right, I've got like this guy. Is this gonna work? Right? Is that gonna be? Yeah, I feel like that's too dark. I need something much lighter, right? For this sort of ground. That's probably too yellow. I could probably use this, right? Or let me see what I've got. Yeah, I think I'm just going to keep it even simpler, right? I might actually just use some of this, right, as a base and see if I can get this background kind of happening. And again, this is going to be to, sort of fade it off. I don't need this to be 100%. Sort of rendered, because again, I'm not doing illustration, we're sort of learning, but part of this is, yeah, like ratcheting up the complexity so that, as we sort of progress, yeah, I do kind of get better at understanding, okay, like how would we put the background in here, right? How would that actually kind of function? How would that work? Going too fast for the marker here. And yeah, it's looking pretty dull at the moment. I'm hoping that I'll be able to add some warm shadows and actually kind of get it working well. And this is where, yeah, like exactly how these things function is very dependent on exactly what paper you're using, like what sort of texture you can get. Does this look good? I'm trying to keep it a little bit less brushy, a little bit more kind of structured. And the reason that this is sort of interesting to me is yeah, like I'm genuinely interested. People have often asked me in the past to do this, which is like, yeah, learn watercolors, do something that you're not sort of comfortable with, show us kind of that sort of journey. And it sort of puts me a little bit more in, excuse me, in that sort of mindset of like, yeah, what's it like to suck at stuff and have to deal with it? Anyway, what's that like? Awful, terrible. Okay, I think I'm going to leave the background white. I don't feel like I'm going to be able to add anything sort of really special to it. I've got this sort of awkward bit there, and part of me is like, well, yeah, like, should I, right? Like, should I try and like add some extra bits here? Like, I don't know. I don't know whether this is going to help us. All right. Just starting to look like gross. All right. Let's think about, right? I was sort of imagining maybe we'd be able to use this color here on the cape. And the basic idea is like, this is a blue. This is going to allow us to let the warm colors kind of pop a little bit. But this could be too much. This could be the end of this whole thing. Right. And a lot of, the other stuff that's going to be important here is, yeah, like, how do you use these tools? Like, how do I use the wedge tip? How do I use the brush tip? Like, when's the right time to use one? When's the right time to use another? Part of, I think, what sort of caught me off and made me sort of fail the first time, again, 20 years ago when I was trying to learn this stuff was, having, like, understanding, you can get like airbrushes for markers, you buy like a full set and you can have blenders. And I was like, I need to blend things. Yeah, like in so many cases, it's just like this obsessive, like sort of over focusing on all the little bits that don't matter. I'm not sure I want these highlights on him. Not sure like these are going to be right. I'm going to see what happens if I do another pass. Does this kind of darken up? Or does it all just kind of go together? Not quite sure. Right. Let's, okay, I'm going to try and, I'm just going to try and get rid of that on the moustache. I don't think that's really kind of working well. Because again, it's breaking the style, right? It's like that doesn't happen anywhere else. Why would it happen here? Okay, I'm pretty much out of time, right? So things that I would sort of do now is look at like, this guy is kind of what I was doing a lot of the shadows with, right? And it'd be interesting to see like how does this kind of help us. The basic theory here is we've sort of got warm shadows. So what this is going to allow me to do is just go through. I'm just going to clear a bit of space here. Just go through and add some very sort of stylized, but hopefully kind of really useful and interesting, much sort of warmer shadows here. And basically, what we're dealing with here is like a very stylized sort of red shadow look, right? This is going to be very sort of stylized, right? And it'll either work or not work. But I often really like this, right? I like this kind of level of stylization. Again, it kind of reminds me of like, yeah, old school. I'm really on like an old school 80s D&D fantasy kick. Not in terms of playing D&D. Never really been into playing D&D. I just like the art, watching movies and stuff. But yeah, that kind of vibe, right? Like that kind of style of like 80s fantasy, like 80s Dungeons and Dragons. Right? For me, for some reason, this kind of marker concept art just kind of says that to me. So yeah, apologies if this is a bit weird. You're like, what are you doing? Why? It's a thing, I think. And again, this looks a lot brighter on screen than it does in real life, but it probably looks weirder in real life, right? See whether I can go to draw close so we can kind of see. Right, so again, what I'm doing here is thinking about where the shadow is. Just blocking that in. And yeah, I mean, the terrifying thing about this whole like marker process, you kind of got to get it right. You know, like I've sort of got to get this right, or the whole thing doesn't work. But the good thing, I guess, about working traditionally versus digital is you're kind of forced to act. So I find that it's much easier to sort of get into a good sense of flow with this, right? Where, yeah, you know, I kind of have to get into the right vibe. Yeah, I kind of have to sort of make it work. I have to think about, you know, what the look is that I want. Right, I think a lot of this is actually going to be in shadow. Right, this whole hand is mostly going to be in shadow. So yeah, I just really like working traditionally because I find even though digital is what I use professionally, there's just something that kind of makes you go into artistic flow way more when we're sort of working on these traditional processes and techniques. Right, that kind of fear of like, I can totally mess this up. Right, we'll see. Again, famous last words. Boom. And here's where, again, for me, like this thing gets interesting is like, I can add this same shading to the rest of the image, and in many cases it'll sort of give me some interesting results. And yet I may need to really kind of tweak this later on, right? I think it'll work a little bit better with some of the cooler colors, right? Because I have warm colors, warm shadows, cool highlights. Well, and again, might have to tone some of it down, right? Add some other bits and pieces. Yeah, it looks very day glow on screen when I kind of look at it. It doesn't look quite that bad. But yeah, here's where I think it'll start to come together is we add some of these more saturated colors over the top of the cools. They're going to sort of mix together and create a kind of interesting pattern. And again, I might have to go over the top, like separate out some of these sort of elements from each other. Trying to get a little bit A little bit artistic with it. Oh, oh. Yeah, so at the moment, yeah, some of these things are not quite working out. Probably need to go and, yeah, finish this off. And you can always tweak these things in Photoshop, right? Which is always something I kind of don't ever want to do, but yeah, the reality is it's something that is often a major part of the process, is tweaking it, making sure it kind of works. Now, obviously, we could probably pick. Let's go back to this one, right? We could probably pick a much safer way of doing this, right? Like these red shadows are pretty ballsy. I feel like it was kind of working here, kind of nicely. Maybe it won't work here as well. Let's play around. The reason that I'm really sort of interested in trying marker is also that like there is something final about it, something where this will probably take a couple of hours, but after that you've got something that's it's just sort of sitting there, and I'm hoping that as I sort of progress, right, like as I get better at this, that these will take me less time, and that really is the goal. Is like eventually this stuff will take kind of less time. I'll be able to just kind of slap some marker on a rougher drawing, and quickly have something that's traditional, that I feel like kind of works. A bit looser here. So as we hit the periphery of the image, right, I can get a little bit sort of looser, a little bit more sort of suggestive. Cool. All right. So it's kind of working okay, right? Sort of working all right. Again, looks very day glue on the screen. Let's look at how we can potentially kind of tone it down. Firstly, you'd probably use like there's probably a lighter version of this that I could use. And I'm like, maybe even, I'm like, maybe this might have been, like maybe it might have been that color that I could have used. I don't know. Again, this is where we can experiment. We can learn. The other thing is, some of the previous ones had that, yeah, and I do feel as if right, I feel like as if this is not helping. Oh no, that's warm gray 3. That's no good. I need warm gray 1. Yeah, not 100% sold on adding that kind of highlight. Again, it feels a bit more like, well, there's meant to be rendering there. If there's rendering there, why isn't there rendering everywhere? And then it kind of looks a bit sort of weird. So to me, I'm like, yeah, I feel like that works better. That was kind of my hunch, right? All right. Now, yeah, here we can start to play around with some different things. Again, I've sort of got a warm gray 3, and I can probably go through and push some of these down a little bit, right? Like add a little bit more sophistication. Because one of the challenges and one of the things that I would often do digitally is, obviously these are all exactly the same color. Like if I can kind of tweak it a bit and make sure that, you know, this color feels different to this color, right? Like that's going to help quite a bit. Again, I feel like this would be much better. And yeah, same thing where, you know, you can probably try and separate these out a little bit. And this is something that's really worth doing digitally, right? This often makes all the difference. It's just, you know, making these different things that we've got slightly different tonalities. Same thing here. Let's see if we can add some darkness over the top. Separate out that a little bit. And yeah, like also, right, see whether we can play around with some of these others, right? Here I've got the right, this one is green gray 3. Right, yeah, I feel like there's probably a bit too much of a similarity here. But this will probably be the last thing that I do here, right? Like, I don't think anything else is really going to help. And that's the beauty of traditional art, right? Is, you know, it's when it's done, and you kind of you can kind of overwork it and add more if you really want. But yeah, you know, in most cases, if I overwork it and I add more, right, it's going to ruin it. So, you know, it's good to kind of leave it and, you know, try another day. And yeah, I feel like one of the problems here is that, yeah, trying to blend this out, maybe not the best idea. Might be better to kind of, yeah, really try and contain some of these shapes. Darken that out. Let's make the focus on the character. Yeah, looking pretty messy. And this is going to be bleeding through like crazy. Completely destroying everything. Yeah, let's see whether we can fade this out a little bit. Cool. Okay. I think that's all I can do here without like massively kind of messing everything up. But yeah, I do feel as if probably it's like a bit too much contrast. It would be good to kind of fade things a little bit, or, you know, maybe sort of try and tweak things. But yeah, that's probably all I can do at this point. And yeah, part of me wants to be like, how do we kind of tone down some of these colors? Like, how do we kind of tweak it? But yeah, that is sort of very challenging. You know, like one thing that I think you could probably do is, yeah, put like a, you know, different sort of background behind it. But yeah, I think probably what I do in the future is like not have any of the background, because I think, again, it's kind of pretty poorly done, and it's sort of hard to make it sort of look clean. Whereas I think if this probably was clean, like these, I think it would sort of work a little bit better. Yeah, so anyway, somewhat of a success, and all we've sort of really done is, just sort of pick a bunch of grays. We've got warm shadows, in many cases like very warm, very red. It's a little bit stylized. But yeah, just sort of going through the process, and next time I do this, hopefully it would be a little bit better. Okay, so let's just check this out a little bit closer up and do a recap. As I said, I think the most important thing is to get started, and hopefully I've kind of made the case for that. This is probably, probably a smarter way of going about this would be to not do it like this. Again, let's add a few more little things. Probably it would be better to not just sort of jump in and try and make it perfect. But part of what I'm trying to communicate is, that even if I have all the skills in the world, even though I've been doing this for decades, if I tackle a new medium or something that like I'm not used to, there's no expectation I should have of that working out right. And the fundamental thing to, I guess, sort of build is just understanding, like, what is your expectation? Like, what is your expectation of success? Like, how do you think this kind of should work, right? Like, I think often the challenge that I had early on, and the problems that I kind of had early on, was that, I just sort of had no idea what I was doing, but I sort of somehow expected that, I'd just be able to ace this thing. It's like, because I'm like, well, why not? Why can't I do really well? And the reality is, like, it just takes a while, and the first few times you try any of this stuff, it's gonna take ages. It's gonna be a big challenge, and I think you just kind of sort of jump in. And here's the real trick, and this is what most of my sort of teaching is based around, is like, fail fast and fail early. Like, that's a bit of a cliche, but it is really important to understand from a visual learning modality, is that so much of how we learn when we're learning visually with these sort of physical skills, like sort of drawing, is that, you kind of have to feel what's going on, right? Like, I've got to sort of understand at a deep level why one thing is going to work over another thing, and, exactly how to kind of make it better. And now what I'm going to do is go away and sort of think about, okay, like, what worked, what didn't work, how could I kind of change things, how can I make it better, and probably the things that I would try, and this is good, is always step back and go like, okay, what could we change? I would say, probably for me, the concept of like building a background around one of these is going to take me a little bit longer, right? And I probably should have just stuck with like a character kind of silhouette there. Because doing sort of too much stuff at once is probably too much. So that's probably what I would do, is probably like in terms of scope. Tackling this was probably too much. I could have stuck just with, like I was sort of doing before, just a character on a flat background, because like I hadn't really tested before how you would build up a background. And I'm like, I don't know, like that seems like a different skill set. I need to think more about kind of how you build it up, how you would sort of work through that, whether I put a background behind the character, all those kind of things. But what I sort of was missing very early on when it comes to these different elements of, where are we? I've got a green, gray, 3. The thing that I was kind of missing is just understanding like what my expectation should be, right? Like what's it going to be like for me to actually try this? And I was preparing the wrong things. I was trying to just think about this as a buying markers game and not a developing a process game. And the reality is, like, now that I've sort of tried this, I'm a little bit closer to, having some understanding of, how that actually might work. And I've got a whole bunch of new things to try. But yeah, I actually feel kind of good about it, even though I'm like, oh, like, you know, I could have done so much better if this was sort of digital. I still think, you know, that's kind of worth going through the process. Yeah, and just kind of playing around. So I would definitely recommend, if you're sitting there trying to figure out how to use Procreate, markers, watercolor, whatever, just start really small. Start with something that's within your comfort zone. Could be way simpler than this, and just sort of go through the process. And the reality is, yeah, if I do this 100 more times, I'll get much better at it. And, you know, I'll figure out all those kind of little nuances of like how to use the colors, like what these colors actually look like. And there's often, yeah, a couple of little tricks that you sort of find that sort of really work. So it's just a matter of sort of going through and understanding. So again, simple process, thumbnail, make sure you got a plan. Let's actually do some drawing and construction, because as I said, like, you know, this is not going to succeed based on the markers. This is the first time I'm doing it. And make sure we do plenty of secondary form. Again, that'll allow me to do lines and then finally add the color. So yeah, the real thing here is just to get a clear picture of what it's going to be like to go through the process. How do you actually use the tools? Do they work? Do they not? Like, now I'm going to have a much better understanding if I go to test paper, how all of these different bits and pieces work. So yeah, fundamentally jump in, but do so with limited scope. Don't just kind of jump in. And this is often where that advice is like, hey, just start. Yes, just start, but start really small, start really simple. And hopefully you can understand that, yeah, as I said, even though I've got all the skills that I would ever need in terms of doing this stuff professionally, if you tackle a new medium or new technique, or you basically change anything about your process and use something different, you're always going to encounter friction and things aren't going to work, and you need to sort of practice and work through it. And a lot of those kind of first results are going to look like this. You know, they're going to be sort of messy, right? Sort of sketchy. It's not going to work how you want. It's not going to have that sort of professional sort of polish. But that's fine, because again, that's learning. And what we're going to do is work through that and finally kind of refine, get all the kinks out of the system, refine our process, understand how to go deep with the tools that we have, refine the tools, get better paper, and yeah, slowly improve. Anyway, that's all we've got time for in this particular video. Let me know whether that helped you to think through the concept of building a simple, reliable process, understanding how to get over those kind of early phases of learning new tools, techniques, mediums, etc. Yeah, it sucks. It's really frustrating when you don't know how to use those tools. It doesn't matter how much anatomy, perspective, rendering, etc. you have, how good you are with one thing versus another thing. You got to practice doing the thing you actually want to do. And what that means is like, yeah, I'm really good at doing this stuff in Photoshop. I've had plenty of experience. But if I change that medium, all those skills take a long time to transfer and to understand how to enact and actually utilize and apply all the knowledge that I have. So hopefully that'll, again, give you some insight into if you're struggling with this. The most important thing you can do is figure out, like, what is actually the problem? Is this that you don't know your anatomy, your perspective, your rendering, you're not putting in enough secondary form, you have no idea about color theory? Or is it just that you haven't actually tried to do this thing enough? And that's what happened to me early on, as I said. You know, I would try once or twice and I would fail. And I'm kind of failing for many of the reasons that I would still consider me failing right now, is that I just didn't really understand how the process functioned. I didn't understand how to go deep with the tools, what paper to use, how to build it up, which pen to use to make sure the ink is 100% fast against the alcohol-based markers, right? Like, this takes a lot of iteration. And that's just what I didn't understand in the beginning, is it's not a matter of like trying a couple of times and sort of giving up because it's not working. It's a matter of being like, every time you try this, thinking like, okay, what am I going to try next? Am I going to refine the technique? Am I going to expand the scope? Am I just going to have fun? At some point, what will make you better is just going through the process and refining. Like, magic happens there. Not because necessarily I'm going to understand anything fundamentally different about marker technique, but just having a bit of a better feel for like how you would apply them, which colors to use, which colors work in exactly those kind of color sets. Again, this stuff is so important to understand because it is so easy for you to try something new and not know what is actually going wrong. So anyway, let me know if that kind of helped you think through this. Yeah, I'm keen to do more sort of actual kind of real-time video things, even though they tend to work terribly on YouTube. If you haven't already, check out the new line and color quick start guide. It goes over how to build a simple, reliable process. Again, in that one, it's going over how to do it digitally. But yeah, the new quick start guide has a lot more detailed information about the theory behind a simple, reliable process and why it's so important, as well as a full new demo in Procreate. And yeah, I finish it off in Photoshop. So yeah, check that out if you haven't already. It's on the new Drawing Codex platform. And yeah, if you get a chance to check that out, send me an email, drop me a comment down below. Other than that, check out this video for a little bit of extra information on secondary form and drawing. And yeah, other than that, I'll catch you around. Happy drawing.